All right, good evening. This is Chair Justin Cooley, and I would like to call this regular meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Would City Clerk Teresa Purrington please call roll?
Commissioner Houghton,
I am here.
Commissioner Flores,
Here.
Commissioner Khan,
Here.
Chair Cooley,
Here.
Vice Chair Munoz Morris,
Here.
Commissioner Tolley,
Here.
Commissioner Jorgensen.
Here.
All right, thank you. At this time, we will hear any public comment for items not on tonight's agenda. Items raised are generally referred to staff, and if action by the commission is necessary, may be scheduled for a future meeting. City Clerk, do we have any public comment?
No, we do not.
All right. So now we'll move to consideration of the minutes on our consent agenda. Before I call for a vote, do any commissioners have comments on the consent agenda? Do I have a motion and a second to approve consent?
Make a motion to approve them.
I'll second the motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say no. Hearing none. All right, we're moving to the public hearings section of our agenda. Any court challenge to the action taken on public hearing items on this agenda may be limited to considering only those issues raised at the public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the City of San Luis Obispo at or prior to the public hearing. If you wish to speak, please give your name and address for the record. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. The first public hearing is item 4A. The item for us is to review an appeal of the Community Development Director's decision to approve an architectural review application for a mixed-use project at 1925 Santa Barbara Avenue. And at this time, I'd like to ask each planning commissioner for their ex parte disclosures of contact with anyone who has provided information to the planning commissioners not on the record, so that information may be used as part of their decision-making process. None? Okay, I have no ex parte disclosures to make, and I'm not seeing any from any of the other commissioners. So at this time, I'd ask Assistant Planner Walter Etzel to please provide the report.
Make sure I share the correct screen here. Very good, thank you. Good evening, Chair Cooley and Commissioners. This item concerns the appeal of the Director's decision approving a proposed mixed-use development at 1925 Santa Barbara Avenue, which is comprised of 3 new buildings providing 4 new dwellings and a small street-fronting non-residential space. Because the project is located within the Railroad Historic District, it was reviewed by the Cultural Heritage Committee, who is tasked with providing recommendations to decision makers regarding consistency of proposed new construction with the city's historical preservation policy standards and guidelines. Over the course of 2 public hearings, the committee formulated a recommendation to the director that the project be found consistent with historical preservation policy standards and guidelines, taking into consideration the historic preservation ordinance and the architectural guidelines from the Railroad District Plan, the evaluations presented in staff reports at the public hearings, and correspondence from the public to the committee, and public comment provided to the committee at the hearings. The project was subsequently approved by the Community Development Director, and this approval was based on evaluation of the project consistency with policies and programs from the general plan, conformance to development standards set out in zoning regulations, guidance from the city's community design guidelines, correspondence to the director from the public, and as well as the recommendation from the Cultural Heritage Committee. Wayne Terry, the owner and resident of property immediately southwest of the subject site, appealed the decision of the director, provided a narrative discussion of the reasons for his appeal, which is attached to the staff report for this item, and that is the subject of this hearing tonight. Staff will be recommending that the commission deny the appeal and uphold the director's decision approving the subject application, as described in more detail in the staff report for this item and in this summary presentation. Staff also wants to make the commission aware of limitations set by state law, that under the Housing Accountability Act, any action that would deny or reduce the density of a housing development project that conforms to objective development standards must be based on a finding of specific adverse impacts to public health and safety. And the Housing Crisis Act limits imposition of design standards to objective design standards, as given the definition at the bottom of this slide here. So with that in mind, staff notes that the project has been comprehensively evaluated and found to conform to applicable development standards, such as those for building height, lot coverage, setbacks, floor area ratio, and the like. So the project in question is proposed for a 7,250 square foot site outlined here in yellow. It's on the west side of Santa Barbara Avenue, about 250 feet south of Upham Street. This slide is rotated in orientation so that north is to your left. It's just to kind of orient along Santa Barbara Avenue here. So this is all within a service commercial zone, and the appellant's property is situated on Choro Street at the corner here where I'm hovering the mouse cursor. So the site today hosts only a small commercial building installed in 1985. That building served as an office for a used auto lot and most recently used for personal services. It was called the Brow Shop. It should be noted that the single-family dwellings that you see on either side of the subject today continue as legally non-conforming uses, as single-family development is not a permitted type of development in services and manufacturing area under current land use limitations. Also in the vicinity, and as shown by shaded lots on this slide, are found several listed historic resources. At the corner with Upham Street here, we find the Del Monte Cafe and an adjacent dwelling at 875 Upham. Those are contributing list resources. Behind the site, you do have the Chapek House at 843 Upham here, and the Biddick residence next door where the appellant resides. And those are master list resources in the city's inventory of historic resources, although the properties do lie outside of any historic district. Here you can see the boundary of the railroad district cuts between the block. The Old Town district, there's a finger of it that comes toward Upham here. So this area out here is outside of any district. On this slide is a compilation of photographs of the properties and buildings in the immediate vicinity of the subject site, mainly along the west side of Santa Barbara Avenue, proceeding roughly from south to north. It gives you an idea of the pattern and the character of nearby development. The buildings proposed for this site, the project is composed of 3 new buildings. At the street frontage, a non-residential suite. At the middle, 1 accessible dwelling unit, and at the rear, a triplex building with 3 dwellings situated over a partially subterranean parking area. Residential buildings are of a fairly conventional residential style. The non-residential suite, Santa Barbara frontage, is given a more industrial character with corrugated metal and deep roof overhang. The residential buildings are offset at the upper floor. They do cantilever somewhat toward the north. The back triplex building is set on concrete supports over the parking area. And the applicant's plans and project description that were attached to the staff report provide more details about the project design concept. So in formulating its recommendation on the project, the Cultural Heritage Committee applied the city's Historic Preservation Program guidelines, which describe the Railroad Historic District, including its predominant site features and characteristics, and the elements of its historic character. These guidelines aim to ensure that new structures in the district are designed to be architecturally compatible with nearby resources and with the district's prevailing historic character in terms of siting, scale and massing, and architectural materials and elements. Reference is also made to more specific guidelines for development set out in the Railroad District Plan. This is an area plan adopted in 1998 to guide development in the district. As discussed in the CHC staff reports for the application and also in the findings on which the director's approval was based, the buildings were found to be consistent in scale and architectural character with the buildings in the Railroad District and to incorporate architectural characteristics set out in the plan. So moving to the issues raised in the appeal that was filed, we saw that the appellant claimed that his right to public comment was hindered at the second meeting that was held by the Cultural Heritage Committee on March 25th, as the deputy city clerk could not accommodate his request to load a visual presentation that had some photographs of property in the vicinity that were to supplement his public comment at that hearing, and that thus he could not provide important information to the committee for their consideration. However, staff notes that the city's electronic visual aid policy is well publicized on meeting agendas and in the city's website. It sets a deadline on the day of an advisory body meeting for providing visual aids for public comment. The policy is in place so that materials can be confirmed to be safe for uploading to the city's computer network, and in consideration of the fact that the clerk staff may otherwise be engaged at the beginning of an advisory body meeting. For these reasons, the appellant's request could not be accommodated immediately prior to that committee meeting. However, staff did have a collection of photographs of buildings and a full collection of photographs of buildings on Santa Barbara Avenue in question, and these were displayed in support of Mr. Terry's public comment. And furthermore, we note that the appellant took advantage of every opportunity to provide correspondence and public comment and provided substantial information directly to the commission for their consideration, and also to the community development director prior to action being taken on the application. The appellant also claims that the committee's deliberation on the project was inadequate and improper, noting that the project representative was not present at the second committee hearing, and that the committee chair had communication with the project architect prior to the committee hearing. And it is true that the project architect missed the second hearing due to an inadvertent scheduling error, but the commission did determine that it had sufficient information for deliberation and formulation of their final recommendation to the project. And the absence of the project representative does not prevent this. Discussion between the committee chair and the project architect is permissible under the Brown Act, as noted in the staff report, and the communication was properly disclosed by the chair at the committee hearing. As to the project itself, the appellant describes his perception of the development pattern in this portion of the Railroad Historic District in terms of the predominant building height, form, spacing, setbacks, and so on, and expresses a preference for the site design exhibited by the mixed-use project at 1957 to 1977 Santa Barbara Avenue. You may be familiar with the sort of false front design. That's the top row, second and third photographs here, these three buildings. They exhibit a 60-foot rear setback to accommodate a parking area behind the development, and the appellant suggests that this is representative of the area's development pattern. Staff notes that, as shown in the pattern study provided in the applicant's plans, the pattern of siting, spacing, and setback of buildings varies on this section of Santa Barbara Avenue. It is in no way uniform, and that the Railroad District Plan does not prescribe a particular development pattern. It in fact contains no specific development standards in regards to building height, setbacks, and the like, but refers instead to development standards in the zoning regulations. And as already noted, the project had been found to be consistent with all the applicable development standards, including the enhanced rear setbacks that are intended to provide a buffer between certain residential zones, such as the R2 zone behind it, and the adjacent zones of higher intensity. Also interesting to note that the proposed development is subject to the same 35-foot height limit in its CS zone as would apply to the adjacent R2 zone. The height of these proposed buildings comes in well under that limit. And finally, the appellant claims that the proposed project would negatively impact masterless historic resources in the vicinity. And here, staff points to guidelines to the Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, regarding impacts to historical resources, noting that specific impacts are described as those that cause substantial adverse change in the significance of an historical resource. And that substantial adverse change involves material impairment, such as demolition or alteration of the physical characteristics of a resource, such as some of its character-defining features if it were to alter porch columns, roof forms, window trim, siding, and that kind of thing. But here, the development of the proposed project is taking place on an entirely different site to any historic resource, including the Biddick House, and therefore has no capacity to materially affect the building or the property or any other historical resource nearby. And the appellant hasn't provided any evidence that the significance of any resource would be so impaired by the proposed project. In summary, the Community Development Director and the Cultural Heritage Committee took into full consideration all relevant matters, including the development pattern of the historic district, the city's historical preservation policy standards and guidelines, and the possibility of any potential negative impacts to historic resources. The director's decision was informed by correspondence received from interested parties, including correspondence directly from the appellant, and by the recommendation of the Cultural Heritage Committee, who are charged with the application of the city's historical preservation standards. The committee's recommendation was formulated in the course of 2 duly noticed and conducted public hearings, following review of all relevant information and staff reports and presentations, and of all public correspondence and in-person comment, including that provided by the appellant. Therefore, there appears to be no basis on which to uphold the appeal or to find any inconsistency with relevant policy standards or guidelines, nor to find any impact to public health and safety that would meet the requirements of the Housing Accountability Act. And given these circumstances, staff does recommend that the commission deny the appeal and uphold the decision of the director approving the subject application. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you very much. Do any commissioners have any questions for staff?
What defines an accessible dwelling unit, the middle unit there? Why is it accessible and the other ones are not?
Accessible to those with handicaps, so it has certain features that makes it easier to reach. I'd say people in yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to be sure. Thank you.
Disability access.
What exactly is the rear setback, and does it exactly meet or does it exceed the prescribed for the CS zone?
The proposed, let's see, the rear setback is a bit over 12 feet from the rear property line, and that exceeds, I'd say slightly, the minimum required setback under the enhanced edge conditions provision.
Okay. Can you briefly explain enhanced edge conditions?
Yes. In the CS zone, there are typically no setback requirements unless you are adjacent to a different zone, in which case that zone's setback requirements apply. In addition, where certain zones are adjacent to each other, such as a CS zone with an R2 zone, deeper setbacks or a different set of setbacks that are deeper are required. So it's an elevated level of setbacks to provide a buffer between what are thought of as higher intensity zones versus some of the lower density residential zones.
Okay, so that would apply just to the west edge of the property in this case because it butts up against R2.
Yes, because that's the only part where they're adjacent.
Okay, when you do the enhanced or the edge conditions, then you come out with about 12 feet is required, and we're at 12 and a half, something like that.
That's my recollection, is it starts at a minimum of 10 feet, and then as the building gets higher, that setback comes in to 12 and maybe as much as 14 feet by the time you get to the highest level.
Does that edge condition take into account the slope of the natural grade there, or is that a factor at all?
It is insofar as the setbacks are measured from the level of the ground, existing topography, and measured up the wall in that way. So it's measured differently than building height. It's measured from existing topography. And so, yes, slope from existing topography will affect
Okay.
how that's measured.
And the height limit's 35 feet, and what are we at that point above natural grade?
When I've measured the plans at the rear end, ranges between 25, 26, 27 feet.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Munoz Morris.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering if you could go back to the slides where we have the three main claims from the appeal, starting me with the first one. Because these are, I would consider these to be pretty serious accusations if indeed, we're hindering, free speech and potentially violating Brown Act rules, right? So you already mentioned that it is clearly posted, that the guidelines for providing documentation for a public speaker are clearly posted. I wanted to ask, so let's say I want to speak at an upcoming meeting and I have a flash drive with some slides I want to show, and I do make the deadline. Does that guarantee me the right to actually show those at the public hearing, or is there discretion by city staff? What happens there?
Yeah, the intent is to provide for that opportunity to use that visual aid, so there's no desire on our part to disallow that. So as long as it's been given its virus scan and uploaded.
But does making the deadline grant me the right to have those there, or is it still basically city staff's call? I'm trying to decide. So if we're talking about hindering speech and we're talking about not making the deadline, would making the deadline guarantee that I can project whatever slides I want to submit?
Yeah, I think I can answer that as the city clerk and the person who has actually put the rules in place. So yes, if the member of the public meets the deadline and gets it to us before the noon time, we would not stop them if it's part of their public comment.
Okay, thank you. And then, so moving on to the second claim, and I want to make sure that I understand, so maybe, it sounds that in the case that Frida, his speech to make or his right to make a comment was hindered, it seems like what we're saying here, or what the claim is saying here is, therefore, the CHC was not able to make a fully informed decision because my public comment was not fully shared. Is that roughly what we're saying? Am I understanding that correctly?
That is the sense that staff has from reading the description of the appeal.
Okay.
I would defer to the actual appeal description.
Okay.
But
That's your understanding
that was
roughly?
the sense that it conveyed to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, kind of similar to my first question about the first claim, and maybe looking here at the sites as well. If during a public hearing, we can make the case that somebody's right to speak was hindered, would that render any decision made on that item, I guess, not valid, invalid somehow? If we can prove that somebody's speech was like yeah, maybe you can.
I think there's a lot of potential hypotheticals in which the result could be different. Given the set of facts here, non-compliance with our policy that we have to take very seriously for IT security purposes, for various reasons that Teresa could go into, I don't think the failure to include those visual aids would render the CHC's recommendation to the decision maker, there wasn't final action taken, deprivation of the right to provide public comment. He did provide public comment, and as I understand it, there was also an additional submission made by the appellant directly to the director prior to final decision being made, so there was another opportunity to provide whatever information he so desired.
Great, thank you. I know I was kind of getting into hypotheticals, but I think your answer addresses where I was going with it, so thanks. No further questions, thanks.
And just to make sure I understand that answer, sorry to do that, but even assuming there was some sort of impairment of the ability to speak, the ability to present those materials to the director and to this planning commission would, assuming there was some sort of impairment, would remedy that?
Yeah, certainly, again, depending on the facts, if we felt that the individual was, truly deprived of the right to provide public comment in accordance with council-adopted, policies and procedures, we would certainly evaluate that and provide the opportunity to cure any violation before, a final action was taken. And, in part, that's why we're here tonight. You'll hear from the appellant, and he'll be able to provide you with whatever information he'd like, and perhaps that was submitted in accordance with our visual aid policy.
Thank you. Commissioner Khan, I believe you're up next.
No question.
Anyone else have any questions they'd like to address before we open the hearing?
I've got sorry. I have other questions, but I was going to wait until we hear from the public, so.
I just wanted to clarify with staff that the rear setback they're talking about is over 12 feet to the building itself, and the roof probably, but there is a stairway to access the building that is in that setback area, and that's allowed, correct?
That's right, and that's my recollection for the plans. There is some stairway that does encroach, and that's generally a permitted encroachment under zoning regulations.
Thank you.
Okay, last call for any questions for staff before we open the hearing formally. Seeing none, I will now open the public hearing. We will begin by giving 10 minutes to the appellant. As a reminder, the appellant is entitled up to 10 minutes of public testimony and may reserve any portion of that 10 minutes for response. If you wish to reserve time, could you please let the city clerk know before you begin, or they will make note if you have any time remaining after your presentation. After the appellant, the applicant is entitled up to 10 minutes of public testimony and may reserve any portion of that 10 minutes for response. Please let the city clerk know if you would like to reserve time for the response. Okay, so we're to the appellant.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I wasn't listening.
Essentially, we want to know if you want to reserve any time to respond, or if you want to just, whatever you don't use, be reserved.
Oh, so we only get 10 minutes of time, so if someone wants to ask me a question, they cannot
I
ask
believe our
me a
questions would not
question.
count against your time, but if you just want to, you have 10 minutes to make a presentation, and you can
Okay.
reserve time for a response if you'd like to.
I understand, thank you. Yeah, I need the entire time, unfortunately. So yeah, good evening, commissioners, and thank you for your time. Also, thank you to city staff for their time as we've gone through this process and for moving my slides along. I'm Leslie Terry, and I'm speaking on behalf of my husband, Wayne Terry. I'll be demonstrating this evening that the project before you is not consistent with city code guidelines and plans with regards to spacing, scale, and setbacks. Slide. So why do such things matter? The proposed project is located within a historic railroad district and is adjacent to master list historic properties, and as such, should have an additional level of evaluation compared to projects located elsewhere. Master list properties are properties the city has determined are worthy of protection, and these protections extend beyond the structures themselves. These homes date back to the early 1900s. According to the city's historic context statement, houses from this period were garden-oriented homes uniquely suited for the climate and lifestyle of our region. Slide. Requirements for designating properties as historic resources and the purpose of historic districts can be found in the Historic Preservation chapter of City Ordinance. The Chapek House is historically significant because of its association with a noted designer builder and town council member, John Chapek. The Biddick residence is historically significant because it was built by Mr. Chapek and it features unique architecture. It is the only single-story gambrel roof structure in the city. Both these homes maintain their original architectural integrity, including their garden spaces. The ordinance includes language regarding the setting of historic resources and protection of the setting. Slide. The historic preservation guidelines speak to protection of historic resources regardless of their location and speaks to architectural compatibility with nearby resources. I will be highlighting key language for you throughout my presentation and will underline should and shall language. I think it's important to acknowledge the use of these words. Shall is mandatory, while should is permissive. Just because should is used does not devalue the importance of a requirement. Slide. The Railroad District Plan includes this language which speaks to scale, setbacks, and spacing. I understand from staff that even though this project is primarily residential, the residential building language does not apply, and we should look to prevailing commercial development for comparisons. Slide. Here's a district image of the district, and per staff, I'll be comparing the existing commercial development between Broad and Upham Streets to the structures in the project for scale, pattern, and spacing. Slide. Traveling north on Santa Barbara from Broad Street, here are the first 6 properties. All are developed commercially. The first 5 are single-story and all have generous spacing, mature trees, and vegetation. The Hive is the first mixed-use development we encounter in the district, and it is located on the east side of its property. It is obviously 2-story with ground floor commercial and second floor residential. Slide. Behind the Hive building, you can see the generous spacing between the relatively tall structure and the residential buildings to the west on Choro Street. At the corner of this block, we have more single-story commercial development, which also includes generous spacing to the blue home you can see on Choro Street. Crossing over High Street, we have the relatively large single-story Transitions building. It has an abundance of space, including a large separation to the homes on Choro Street. It has mature trees and lush landscaping, which are echoed in the next 3 properties, which are developed with mixed-use buildings. All 3 have ground floor commercial and second floor residential. Like the Hive, these are relatively tall buildings placed on the east side of their parcels adjacent to Santa Barbara Street. The west side of the property has the space you see here behind them, so they are not towering over the Choro Street homes to the west of them. Slide. North of the mixed use is an old commercial development featuring several single-story buildings and a large old barn. Unfortunately, these buildings typically aren't maintained because they do seem to contribute to the character of the area. There are occupied single-story residences on either side of the project site, one of which is multifamily with single-story units in the back. I believe that if they were to add a commercial use, they would then be compliant with their commercial zoning. The project site is a small parcel with a small commercial building. It's typically neglected with weeds and failed fencing. In general, I think it's an effective strategy to allow an eyesore so that any development can be seen as an improvement. The final building in this block is the Del Monte Cafe. Like most of the structures in this part of the district, it is a single-story building. There's generous spacing and mature trees, including the beautiful oak you see here. Slide. Now that we've taken a look at the existing development in the appropriate parts of the district, let's look at the language found in the historic preservation guidelines. There is the use of shall, and we see language regarding scale, siting, and setbacks to historic structures. Figures give some examples of non-compatible development. Slide. We've seen existing development, and we know new development needs to be consistent with spacing, scale, et cetera, within the district. Let's look at the proposed project a little more closely. We see the 1-story commercial to the east side, the 2-story single-family residence that is accessible but still has stairs, and then the final 3-story triplex adjacent to the Chapik property to the west. You might be wondering why I refer to the triplex as 3-story while staff report generally refers to it as a 2-story. Slide. On page 36 of your staff report, I'd like to bring to your attention the dashed line, which is the natural grade. At the west end of the triplex, the underground parking is 3 feet below grade. This means the ground floor is 7 feet above grade, and then there's a 2nd story above that. Another way of looking at it is all outside space for the residents will be several feet above the fences to historic resources. While the project height and setbacks to the property line is consistent with zoning, it is significantly different from the spacing we've seen elsewhere in the district, especially in mixed-use projects. Slide. Stepping away from the various historic preservation documents, Chapter 17 of the city's municipal code has language relevant for this mixed-use development, important language regarding compatibility with adjacent properties. I'd like to point out shall language regarding minimizing potential impacts as well as enhancing the adjacent built environment in terms of scale, design, and landscaping. These standards apply to any mixed-use development in the city, and I would think they would especially apply to projects adjacent to historic resources. Slide. Page 31 of your staff report shows the ground level plan for the triplex, ground level being 7 feet up. You'll see that there are stairs at both the east and the west end of the triplex. The west end stairs will be less than 10 feet from the Chapik property. Stairs lead to a shared walkway off which are apartment entrances. There are benches for seating, presumably to encourage residents to sit and hang out looking down into the Chapik House gardens and windows. The south side of the triplex provides residents with some private outside balcony space. You can see the spaces are pivoted just a bit to give them a feeling of privacy from each other. It also points the largest part of these spaces directly down into the Biddick House garden and windows. Both living spaces and bedroom spaces above them have generous windows facing down into our home. This does not strike me as compatible nor minimizing potential impacts to either historic property, and it clearly is not enhancing the built environment of historic resources. Slide. The final bit of language I'd like to share this evening is regarding infill multifamily structures. This language is found in the city's community design guidelines. There is more language regarding compatibility with existing adjacent development with regards to scale, siting, and character. It states this is crucial because when development takes place next to older homes, never mind historic older homes, the height and bulk of the new construction can have negative impacts on smaller scale buildings. The Biddick House is a small single-story historic resource. Being single-story is a big part of its significance to the city. It is historic not just because of the building, but because of what it and the Chapik House contribute to the city. Per Historic Preservation Ordinance, historic resources are important to the community's economic vitality, quality of life, and sense of place. Their existence enhances the distinctive character and sense of place in our city. Slide. Finally, I'd like to remind you that no mixed-use development on Santa Barbara Street in the Railroad District places structures along the west side of their properties adjacent to Choro Street homes. No mixed use features a standalone apartment complex. Existing mixed use development includes generous space buffers between higher density and lower densities, and this pattern should continue as we develop the district. The majority of commercial parcels along the west side of Santa Barbara are developed with single-story structures. With that, I am respectfully requesting you reject the community director's approval of this project. It should be modified to address conflicts with regards to spacing, scale, and setbacks identified in city guidelines. Thank you again for your time. I'm available for questions.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got a lot into that 10 minutes. Do any of the commissioners have questions for the appellant at this time? Okay, if there aren't any questions for the appellant right now, then I guess we can go to the applicant's presentation. And again, I'd remind you, you have 10 minutes. If you know you'd like to reserve some time for a response, please let the clerk know.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Barry Williams. I'm the architect, and I'm representing the project. If we could go to this sectional slide. Some of the slides you've already seen, so I just kind of wanted to go to that. This project meets or is well below all of the guidelines that the zoning ordinance has put forth. I would like to note a few of them as we go into once we find the section, but the proposed site is 0.166 acres. With that, we're allowed 3.996 dwelling units. We're asking for 2.64 dwelling units. That's 66% of what is allowable. Our parking requirements, we have more than enough parking by one. Our site coverage, we're allowed 75% site coverage. We are at 49%. And the floor area ratio, we're allowed 10,885 square feet, and we're at 3938 square feet, or 36% of the allowable. On the site right here, We can see kind of how we've done. One of the things I would like to mention is as far as the zoning ordinance goes, we lowered that parking long before anything came up. We could, from the zoning ordinance, et cetera, it wouldn't have to go down. We could still be within our height limit by leaving it at that. We did lower it to try to make it less. Walter, if you could go to this section, I think it's about 2 more. Oh, this one, oh, yeah, okay. That one. Only one thing I wanted to show about these slides, this particular on the elevations, it's a little bit different, is that the perspective we've seen is kind of an earlier perspective. The buildings now, the residential buildings now, the language is the same in the sense that they have a horizontal siding on the top, much lighter color than the rendering, and a hard plaster on the bottom. So those 2 buildings now, which does not look good as the previous perspective, now tie in together. But now, Walter, if we can go to this section. There. So in this section, we can see, I don't know if, let's see here. So this is the property line, this red line right here. The enhanced setback is this line. This is actually, we have moved this building back another 8 inches further because of the stairway. So now the stairway is right at the 10 foot, even though it is allowed to be in the setback. So the building now is 13 foot, 3.5 inches. So this is the setback line that we're allowed from the enhanced coming up all the way here. This is the height based upon the setback at the rear of the property. This is the allowable height up here. So we're about, I think it's 5 or 6 feet, 7 feet below. If you go by average grade, this is the height limit right here, is the average grade is this particular one here. That's taken from the center of the site, and there we're about 9 feet below the allowable height. This line, if we were this setback line right here, that comes up like this and across, that is the setback that would have been allowed if this had been an R2 property. So the enhanced setback sets back a lot further than, if this was an R2 property, this particular project could be right there. It could be residential. It could be right there, be a little less dense. So we are within all these guidelines. We meet all these guidelines. Those are the things as designers that we go through. We went through the cultural heritage. There's a number of things that we talked about regarding to the detail, the form, the roof's changed, materials have changed due to their suggestions. And I believe that the cultural heritage recommendation to the director of approving the project and the director's approval should be upheld and the appeal should be denied. I think I have some time left if anyone has any questions, or if not, I would like to hold it for later.
Okay, thank you. I think we can stop the clock and save it for any responses you want to make. Do the commissioners have any questions for the applicant?
Just 2 quick ones. Well, I guess the slide went away, but I guess there was 2 102 units. I'm guessing that was just a typo, right? It was units, 4 units total, not 3.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. On the last slide that we showed, it said unit 100 for the ADU, and then 101, 102, and 102, but that should be 103, I'm guessing, 3 separate units?
There's 3 in the triplex, and then there's 1 of the assessment unit.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Just thanks.
Go ahead.
I have a question for the applicant, and it concerns the single window on the west side. So that looks like it's at the top of the stairway internal.
Landing, yes, correct.
Is that, it looks like about a 2x2 window. Is there any consideration to having that be a privacy window perhaps?
It could be.
Frosted?
It could be. What I really want to do is just get a little light in at the stairway. It's certainly not a view window. It could be a translucent glass as opposed to a clear glass. I have no problem with that.
And
It's
the
mostly
ceiling-
getting light.
You're kind of vaulted there, but not completely. It sort of slopes down, so that precludes having a transom, even higher type window.
Possibly. I could look at that. I mean, it could be a little bit higher. I think, yeah, we could probably do that.
So some sort of privacy glass there could be used.
And I
Okay,
think, to be honest with you, that's the only window that's really facing the appellant's
exactly.
property.
Yeah. And then there were windows that were pointed out by the appellant that are on the south side.
Yeah.
That are sort of angled towards Churro Street. So they give out onto the little walkway patio area,
Right.
right? So I guess well, those are going to be regular windows. There's not much we can do
Those are
about
going to be
that.
regular windows, and I'm really hard pressed to see how that's going to be a view into the appellant's property, to be honest with you.
Right.
Because their line comes the same as ours, so we're looking really to the south and southwest.
And then
From the
the
living area.
windows along the south side that are on the upper second floor, it looks like those are mostly pretty high transom type
They
windows.
are pretty high, yeah.
So they're above typical,
I think
level?
if I'm not mistaken, I believe the sill's at about 5 feet.
okay. So you're going to get good daylight through
Get
there,
light in
some
there.
solar
It faces
gain.
due south, yeah, so we're going to get solar gain in there, light view, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Keep walking away.
I have a question about the stairways. Are 2 stairways required in the back building for fire access, or would one suffice?
No, they're not. One would suffice. And this is, I've talked to the fire department about this. I wanted the second one more out of convenience, the one in the rear more out of convenience. But by code, we can consider the 2 buildings to be as one because we're under the overall allowable square footage. So we could have just the one stairway in between.
Quick follow-up to that. So for convenience, what sort of convenience do you picture for that? Because it sort of gives out onto this, what seems like kind of a dead area back there.
Well, it's for parking down below. The last couple of spaces, if you're coming out and you're going up to the rear unit, you can come from your car right there straight up as opposed to going around and
Back down.
around through.
Okay.
The other one comes through the parking area, and this would be outside the parking area.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead.
This question is for Walter. Walter, can you put up Ms. Terry's slideshow again? And I think the last slide is what I'm trying to get to. Okay, so we have it, by the way, Leslie, great presentation. You had us all captivated. Okay, so we have it narrowed down to spacing, scale, and setbacks. That is what we're summarizing here. So as far as my concern is how this project and how you could comment on how the project kind of addresses each one of these. For example, spacing in the rear, setback. Look, I appreciate that, you know, you're good with density, you're good with parking, you're good with all these things. That's great. But what the issue here is the design of the buildings, in particularly the rear one. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, can you address these 3 specifically in how a compromise has been made, or if you've addressed them at all, or?
Yeah, we've been through, if you look at the dates, we've been almost 2 years on this project. The first one was, I think, 5 units, a lot taller, and much more, it was much more in contemporary style to the ones that are next to like Miners Hardware. To that, it was flat roofs, 3 stories high. Since then, we've kind of reduced that. We've put the porticos on, we've changed the materials on it. You know, Santa Barbara Street is a corridor going into town, and it deserves to have a density. The guidelines talk about having more residences in that area, more commercial in there. And so that's what we're looking at, trying to do that. This has been downsized quite a bit from the early one, that first ones at Walter's House before it went to cultural heritage on that. So there has been a lot of work gone on this in the last 2 years.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Were story poles erected on the site?
I'm sorry?
Story poles?
No, they weren't.
Okay,
They can be, but yeah, they weren't.
okay.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right, thank you very much. All right, we're going to move on to the public comment portion. City Clerk, do we have any public comment for this item?
Yes, we have 2, Debbie Collins and then Jamie Hendrickson.
Hello. My name is Debbie Collins. I own Del Monte Cafe, that property, as well as 875 Upham Street. I just want to state that I think that a project at this site is important, that we need a building there of some type, but I think it needs to comply with the heritage, or railroad heritage guidelines. I think that the first meeting that we had with the CHC was talking about the mass of this project, and I don't think the architect has dealt with that. And that's about all I have to say. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Jamie Hendrickson. I live at 1946 Torres Street. I lived there for 14 years, and the same block as the project. And we have the Coaglino projects behind us, the one that was shown with the, I believe it's 60-foot setback, 25-foot setback. Those are wonderful projects. Their lighting is spectacular. I'm talking about their evening lighting. It doesn't intrude into our house. We've maintained privacy. We can't see into their balconies. I will say that in the last year, we had an ADU put in adjacent to our property with an exterior stairwell in that setback zone. And my two kids are uncomfortable in our backyard because we have strangers going up and down the stairs. And I may sound a little overzealous of me to say, like, feel emotional about that, but it is. It's about our privacy. It's about the quality of our life in there, and anything you can do, as applicant said, that stairway is not necessary behind this project, and I hope you guys consider that. I also have concerns about the historic view shed from the Upham and Choro intersection, as I think it was in one of Leslie's slides showing the historical buildings there, what the impact of the rear of this building would be when you look over those houses. The railroad district is extremely important to us. We love living in that neighborhood. My son is a docent at the railroad station, and seeing Islay Hill, or it should be Terrace Hill beyond there, that's part of the character of the community. And I hope that you will consider in protecting that for the whole community. It's a very special intersection. I remember being a Cal Poly student and driving through there. I hope you hear Leslie. I do also agree that the photos that were presented in the original CHC meeting showing the different buildings are not unique to that block. This block has a lot of single-family, residential, and multifamily units on it, but some of the newer projects that are on the opposite side of Santa Barbara there, they don't match. They don't fit in with the character of that building. If you haven't been out there, walk behind the Coaglino projects there. They just naturally blended in. They weren't there when we moved in. We had our concerns, but it's been really positive, and it's really positive to go over those buildings and want to support. I've supported the chiropractor over there, the hair salon, and it's good to feel like you can go over there and enjoy being in a place. It's really tough when you see your neighborhood going in a different direction, and so it's nice to be able to support those buildings. And I would love a more mixed use. I'd love to see more businesses. We love that people walk through our neighborhood and bike through our neighborhood, and we love our traffic circles. So I hope that you listen to the panel today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Any other comment?
No, there are not.
If anyone would like to speak and hasn't turned in a slip, please do so now. I'm about to close public comment. All right, we're going to close public comment and bring it back to the commission. Does the commission have any additional questions for staff?
Oh, I do. The view shed issue that the last speaker was speaking on, is there anything, and that's a good point. So is there any type of, was that looked at? Was that a component that was considered during the Heritage Committee review? Is that something that complied? And
I think that we lack any description of what that view shed consists of, or what its significance is, or any of those kind of issues. So what you would likely see is the top of a residential building visible, but that's not uncommon in a suburban setting. And again, conforming to the height limits for the zone. Those are the standards that we have to apply.
So, I'm not a historic preservationist, but is there a protected view shed when looking at a historic structure, going up behind it, like she was saying? Is that even a protected thing? Do you know?
You know, in my experience here, no, unless there's some explicit study, definition, explanation of what that is and what its significance is, and maybe how it should be preserved.
Okay.
And I can just chime in too that as mentioned in Walter's presentation, there's no physical impact with that view shed, so that's not part of the historic evaluation of those particular historic structures.
Because it's on a separate property, and that separate property is not within that district.
It's on a separate property, but that view shed isn't a part of the historic analysis of that house.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff?
Was the Architectural Review Committee involved in this at all?
No, this is a minor development review, so it's at a scale that doesn't require Architectural Review Commission review.
I have a question for the city attorney's office. Earlier today, you provided the commission with some background for a legal framework that some of the appellant's issues might be judged against from a recent court order. Sorry to put you on the spot, but could you summarize some of those issues for us, just to have it on the record?
Sure. Is this working? Yeah, sure. So a few years ago, a very similar argument was made about the impacts of a mixed-use development going in downtown and the potential impacts that it could have on adjacent historic resources. Similarly, the city had applied the infill exemption to that project, and the challenge was made that, again, as the Terrys pointed out, that the infill exemption should not apply because of the historic resources exception and potential cumulative impacts to the historic resource. Same position was taken by the city, and based on its understanding of the CEQA guidelines, that because there was no material impairment to the character defining features of the adjacent resources through literal physical change to those character defining features, there was not a substantial adverse change in the significance of the historic resource, and the court agreed with that point. And basically noted that the definition of material impairment under the CEQA guidelines only relates to physical changes to the resource itself, not the material alteration of the immediate surroundings of a historic resource. And that's a direct quote from the court order. And that has been how city has always interpreted and understood those guidelines, and with the court's concurrence with that approach, we've continued to operate under that analysis. And then with respect to the cumulative impacts argument, the court noted that essentially speculation about potential development projects that might go in is just that, it's speculation, and that's not substantial evidence to support a fair argument that there could be cumulative impacts. And there was no reference to recent projects that were similar in terms of location and size and things like that. So as I was reading the staff report, it just struck me, I think we've litigated this before, and I just wanted to provide that information to the commission and to the public now, so that the city's evaluation and framework has been tested, and the court did agree with us on that front.
Okay, thank you. That is helpful. One more chance for questions of staff. Not seeing any. I would encourage a motion if someone feels inclined to make one or wants to make comments towards deliberations.
I've got questions in general, not necessarily of staff or the appellant or applicant, so just discussion points that would be, I'd like to should I go ahead with that?
Go right ahead.
Okay. All right. So this is an interesting and difficult situation in that neighborhood, which I go through a lot on my bicycle, and I go through there walking sometimes as well. And when you look at the character of, when I go up and down Garden Street, Churro Street, Morrow Street, you can see the historic houses, and then you can see buildings that were put in that did not go through any kind of real review process, and they really stand out. And whenever I see those, I think to myself, God, we better not do that again. And so I'm sensitive to that for sure. I love 1902 Churro. What you guys do is incredible, and the lights, and your house is so beautiful, and it's just such an asset. And that whole street has got just precious houses, and the neighborhood around there, except for the kind of the weird things that have been dropped in thoughtlessly, is really a treasure. So, and you've got this difficult situation because you're right on the border between the commercial, which has a really different character, right on the other side of your fence. You've also got the grade sloping down, which was working against you in this situation. And I've gone up and down Santa Barbara and up and down Churro and looked at what's going on back there. There is another building that does back right up to the property line. It's the old barn, and that used to be the bike shop where I got a bike quite a while ago, because they're not there anymore. So that looks like a zero setback situation, but it's a barn. And then the other buildings, as you go further down towards Miners, they are pushed more towards the east side and towards Santa Barbara proper. And so there's a more of a buffer in the back. But that's because there's an alley coming off of High Street, right? And so there's right? I mean, there's when I look at the Google Earth, is that right? Is that an easement situation? So, Mark, am I getting in trouble by having conversations with the audience? I've gotten in trouble for that before.
I will defer to our city clerk on this, but, I do think that the applicant had time reserved. So if you have questions for the applicant or he wants to respond, surely. In terms of open-ended questions to the public, I guess my question would be, are we reopening public comment if we're going to engage in that?
Well, if I can use the applicant's reserve time to ask this question of the access from High Street, and was it considered, did you look at other ways to try to keep more of the mass of the building towards Santa Barbara?
And I would just ask that if we're going to have extensive responses from the applicant, have you step up to the microphone again, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, yeah.
To the best of my knowledge, the Transitions Building does allow for that. Matt, I think, owns all three of those properties, to the best of my knowledge. And also there's a thing where in combining those lots, 3 50-foot lots, he's able to get the access in and keep the buildings forward. Our problem is that, there's another problem, that if we want to have ground level residences, the ordinance also says we have to be 50 feet back from a commercial building. So that sets that back further. If we were to go a second story over that, like Craig Smith did for Matt, I think that, that would be another option. That was the first option we kind of looked at doing that. But so there's other things that it requires to have setbacks. We thought by trying to lower the parking a little bit and keep the building down that we were trying to make a positive move to the neighbors.
Okay, that answers the question, thanks. Okay. I just had noted that, when I looked at how the other buildings are situated, and they are more historically, I think, consistent with the railroad station and the period and all that, then, but they have that advantage that they can bring cars around the back, and that ends up pushing the buildings towards the front. So, and maybe some of my fellow commissioners will speak to this too, but we've got a pretty narrow set of guidelines that we are allowed to use in assessing this situation. And So, we're mindful of that, but this seems like a time where we get a little, to air these things out a little bit. I only have a couple other things. There's two items on that west side. It's the window at the top of the stairs and the stairway, and then the exterior stairway itself. I'm glad that you asked the question about, is that necessary, that stairway? I don't think we're allowed to ask you to not have that stairway, but I think that, and then the privacy glass at the top on that one single window on the west side, if those things were to be considered, then that would go some distance towards alleviating some of the concerns of the neighbors. So I think with that, I'll let my fellow commissioners have their say.
Let me just, to piggyback on that, ask a question. Are we allowed, under our purview at this hearing, to impose or suggest additional conditions?
If you were to do that, it would need to be based on objective standards that are written and, found in applicable guidelines, zoning code, that you feel perhaps have been missed or overlooked. But to the extent that there is a request, as Commissioner Houghton brought up, to perhaps do something a little bit differently, and if the applicant is open to that, surely they can voluntarily agree to do that, but that is a subjective condition that doesn't exist, that we could not impose on them without their voluntary consent.
Okay, so I'm hearing that no new conditions where we're redesigning the project, but we're free to make suggestions and make requests.
Yeah, I mean, the commission's purview tonight is to uphold or deny the appeal, so I want to keep us, focused on that to the extent that there is direction or feedback given to the applicant for their consideration and voluntary, consent. I don't know why I keep using that word, but that is appropriate. But again, it wouldn't be in the form of a condition of approval unless it was based on a objective standard that was written, available, and knowable to the applicant at the time of submission.
Okay, thank you very much.
Could I also I just want to quickly note that the applicant did mention they were open to some solutions, particularly when questions came up from the window. So it seems like there can be a conversation without having to be in the motion necessarily.
Understood. Anyone else ready to go with comments, or again, as always, willing to entertain a motion too?
I'll make a couple of comments. This is really a tough one. There's no question about it. I guess what I'm trying to do is try to think longer term, sort of what would happen if we go one way or the other with this. And I think my concern is, maybe if I start by saying, if we look at Charles Street and a number of streets around that area, if we looked 100 years ago, there were single houses. Now there's 2 or 3 units pretty much in every yard, and there's room for it. And it accommodates, you can bring in extra money. It probably accommodates Cal Poly. It does a whole bunch of things. It brings more people to the commercial. It's done gradually over a long period of time, and so it kind of fits in. But even right now, there's new construction going on right on the street, right in front. And so it's kind of an everlasting kind of situation, multiple units on each parcel. Santa Barbara should also fill in over time. And I kind of agree, pretty much from what I've seen, that the CHC, with their 2 hearings, were correct that the project is consistent with the historic preservation ordinance and that it adheres to the architectural standards. It's not an easy design problem if we don't do something like this, where we have a body that can sort this out like the CHC has done. And I'm kind of worried that if we go for supporting the appeal, we're going to end up creating a no-win situation on Santa Barbara, where every time there'll be this and that comes up, and it just makes it impossible to come up with a project. This is a pretty clever project in a compromised lot, there's no question. But I'd like to see over time that Santa Barbara does fill in. I do think the architect is correct that it needs to be, there needs to be some massing toward the Santa Barbara side of it as it becomes a corridor and handles that. But I'm just, I can see points that are made on both sides, but I'm nervous in the long run about creating a situation where nobody knows what's going to be allowed. And I'm afraid that could be this kind of situation. With that, I'd be glad to make the motion to deny the appeal.
All right, we have a motion to accept staff's recommendation and deny the appeal. Do I have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Any other comments or deliberation?
I'll just point out, I mean, I agree with what you just said, Commissioner Jorgensen. We're required to assess this with this objective standard as described by our attorney. And
I just want to clarify, objective standard or subjective? I want to make sure I didn't miscommunicate.
No, objective.
Okay, thank you.
Did I said objective, didn't I?
No.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I looked for any kind of, before making up my own mind, I looked for any kind of possible grounds for saying, no, this should go back to the drawing board. And I found none, and our staff found none. And so that really limits our ability to even consider whether we can deny the appeal or approve the appeal, excuse me. So I just wanted to make that point. And I think that we all kind of saw that as well. And so with that, I'll stop.
And I'll just add in that, unlike a lot of members of this commission, my background is not architectural or engineering. My perspective is more legal. And you probably hear that in my questions that I lean on those things. And what I also found, similar to what you're saying, is a very narrow area in which we're allowed to operate on this one in particular. And I think it's fair for us to ask questions about the design and the impact and all those things. But when it comes down to making the decision that's before us tonight, I again think that our perspective, our purview is pretty narrow. And I also will be supporting this motion. Any other comments? If not, City Clerk, I'll ask for a roll call. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would just like to say that, first of all, I don't want to change any of the conditions, but I would certainly ask that Mr. Williams tell his clients that the more they can do to preserve the people's privacy by getting rid of that stairway or changing the window type, I would just encourage it. That's all I'll say is, and I agree with everything I've heard here tonight. It is a tough situation. Thing I like to say is everyone's for progress. It's the change they don't like. And I think we have a change situation here. And I certainly can see the appellant's concerns. So it's a tough vote, but I'll be supporting the motion.
Okay, last call for comments before we ask for a roll call. Go ahead.
Yes, I also support the motion, but as Commissioner Khan said, I do hope that the applicant considers removing the stairway, and that would offer more room for landscaping and things like that. Thank you.
All right, with that, I think we're finally ready for a roll call.
Commissioner Jorgensen?
Yes.
Commissioner Khan?
Yes.
Commissioner Houghton?
Yes.
Commissioner Flores?
Yes.
Commissioner Tolley?
Yes.
Vice Chair Munoz Morris?
Yes.
Chair Cooley?
Yes. We'll give folks a moment to clear out if they want to before moving to our next item. All right, we're moving to item 4B. The public hearing item before us is to review a new mixed-use project located at 10 Higuera Street. Would Senior Planner Rachel Cohen please present the report?
Good evening, Chair Cooley and fellow commissioners. I'm going to go ahead and pull up this presentation, so give me a moment. All right, as noted, our second item this evening is the design review of a new mixed-use project located at 10 Higuera. Staff is recommending that the commission adopt the draft resolution approving the proposed new mixed-use project, associated site design and improvements, as well as the sign program and the removal of 2 trees based on findings and subject to the conditions of approval. The Planning Commission's role is to review the project for consistency with the general plan, the zoning regulations, the community design guidelines, the sign regulations, as well as any applicable city standards. This project requires the Planning Commission's review this evening because it is a major development project and is proposing more than 10,000 gross square feet of new commercial construction. The proposed site is located at 10 Higuera on a property that is split zone between the service commercial zone and with special considerations overlay and the tourist commercial zone with a mixed use overlay. The project is 2.96 acres in size, and it's currently partially developed with a small distillery building along Higuera, as well as some site improvements such as access, parking, and landscaping. Overall, the site is relatively flat with San Luis Creek along the west property line and Exposition Creek along the south property line. The applicant has applied for the construction of this new project and includes 23,000, just over 23,000 square feet of commercial space, which in the future is proposed to contain a distillery, a restaurant and tasting room, as well as other associated spaces, and a 1-bedroom residential unit, as well as site improvements, a sign program, and the removal of 2 trees. The project is a contemporary design with industrial architectural style and utilizes symmetrical and asymmetrical lines, large windows, and a mix of materials and colors. So these are just some of the elevation views of that structure. Materials include box rib metal siding, wood siding, concrete bulkheads, aluminum storefront windows, and a standing seam metal roof. Colors are mostly dark except for the natural wood accents. An extensive landscape plan is proposed for the site that includes the planting of 25 new trees. The sign regulations state that sign programs are required for new mixed-use projects, and as such, the applicant is proposing a sign program that includes 5 different sign areas. Overall, the sign program would allow for 4 signs, with maximum sizes ranging from 150 square feet to 300 square feet. Additionally, the program would allow for limited signage on entry windows and doors. The project is not seeking any exceptions from the development standards and complies with relevant development standards of the zoning regulations. As outlined in the staff report, the project was evaluated for and determined to be consistent with the city's general plan and zoning regulations. Both the ARC and the Tree Committee reviewed the project within their area of expertise. The ARC and the Tree Committee both found the project to be consistent with the city's guidelines, policies, and standards. As part of the ARC's review, they provided 2 directional items to the applicant to consider as part of their project design. Direction item 1 says to provide a change in color, materials, and/or window fenestrations to the north elevation to provide architectural interest. The applicant has revised the north elevation to include more architectural interest by adding the windows, as seen in this slide, as well as wrapping the wood accent feature from the west elevation around to the north elevation. The Planning Commission should discuss if the proposed revisions provide sufficient articulation and architectural features to break up the large wall mass expanse on the north elevation. This should say ARC direction item 2. As for the For direction item 2, the ARC provided direction to provide screening around the bicycle lockers and/or to paint them so that they would better integrate into the site plan and overall architectural design. Staff has added condition of approval number 11 to the draft resolution requiring that the applicant show the bicycle lockers are screened and are painted as part of their building plan submittal. As part of the tree committee's review, they provided one directional item for the applicant to consider as part of their project design. And their direction was that the applicant should consider replacing the proposed 12 strawberry trees with an alternative species from the city's master tree list, with a goal of maximizing canopy potential. The committee noted that the strawberry trees are not well suited for high traffic areas and they would not provide sufficient canopy coverage. Staff has added condition of approval number 14A to the draft resolution requiring that the strawberry trees not be planted as part of the landscape plan and instead new species from the city's master tree list be chosen. So staff again is recommending, based on the proposed changes and conditions of approval, to adopt the draft resolution approving the new mixed-use project that includes the associated site design and improvements, sign program, and the removal of 2 trees and a new landscape plan. This concludes staff's presentations, and I'm available for any questions.
All right, thank you very much. Go ahead.
I thank you for the presentation. Can we go back to slide 10, please? I don't know if my eyesight is failing me more than I thought, but I'm trying to locate the residential unit on this plan, and I couldn't find it. So could you point it out for me, please?
Sure, this is just a site plan, so this is the landscape plan and not the floor plan. So there's a second story inside. So if you looked at the, and I could pull up the project plans, but if you look at the project plans, there's a second story partially inside of this warehouse, and then the unit will be in this corner here. There's not like a...
Sorry, I don't see your mouse. So we're talking about the larger of the 2 buildings,
Yeah, so...
right?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
going
I
to
see
be
your mouse. Okay.
right in here on the second floor. There's like a space below it for I think an office or another sort of use. And the architect is here too, and we'll be able to explain why they decided to locate that. But they were required to be a mixed-use project for this site as part of the requirements with the zoning and that mixed-use overlay. So they had to integrate at least one residential unit into the project.
Okay, so this unit is, okay. How does that work for parking? Is that just because there's ample parking on the site, is there a need to delineate resident parking versus visitor staff parking?
The applicant, they could delineate that. It's not a requirement of our parking standards.
Got it. All right, well, I guess my second question is more for the applicant, but it kind of sounds like the unit is there to satisfy the mixed use requirement primarily.
Correct. And it's not uncommon for some of these larger, we've had not too long ago, a brewery that included like a caretaker's quarters as part of their facility. A lot of times people, if they're starting a new business, they often include housing for people. It's an opportunity if they are going to be hiring folks that they could offer housing potentially as part of that package for employment.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions for staff?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Can you go to the slide with the north elevation that we were looking at from the original to they revised it? Okay, so this is going to be, okay, and but can you go back to the other, I'm just trying to orientate myself because the other site plan I didn't see a north arrow, so I was just trying to get myself oriented.
So the north backs up to Caltrans site. This is the north here.
So that's what I thought, okay.
Yeah, this is the north. The west is over here. Highway 101 is just on the other side here. And then, yeah, so I think originally, and the architect can talk to this, but they originally designed the building closer, but they couldn't move it closer, and so they eliminated a lot of windows, and the ARC provide that direction.
So the property on the other side of the north side of this property line, you said that's Caltrans?
Correct.
I still don't, need to orientate, I need like a zoomed in map, like I still don't know where we're at, but okay.
I can go back, let me just, this might help a little bit, it's not that zoomed out, but.
Okay.
So if this across the street is the gun range, and then you have like Goodwill, there's a old historic building in front of the Caltrans, and then basically Madonna's right up here.
Okay, all right.
It's just up at this top here, so.
Go ahead.
You mentioned the screened bike rack, and that was for some kind of visual. I just want to make sure people can see where the bike rack is so they know where to park their bike.
So it's the bicycle lockers in particular that the ARC gave direction for. There's direction in our active transportation plan that talks about incorporating the bicycle lockers as part of the overall design and architecture of the site, and not just putting a plain vanilla box in.
Are these like those outdoor plastic things that nobody likes to use?
That is what the applicant is proposing, yes.
Okay.
You can save that question for the applicant if you'd like.
Okay. And then regarding this mixed-use business, it does seem like this is the minimum to gain that status, right? Does that imply that maybe our thinking about mixed use and what constitutes mixed use maybe needs some rethinking? Because it seems like there's the opportunity there to have more employee housing on the site. I mean, it's not going to happen on this one because this meets the criteria, but it does seem like a gesture, the smallest possible gesture.
We have in our zoning regulations very specific mixed use sort of design guidelines, and we don't have any minimums for commercial, and we don't have any minimum maximums for residential units at this time, so.
So there's nothing like number of units per 10,000 square feet or whatever like that?
No, not at this time.
And by being a mixed-use project, did it gain any kind of reduced setbacks or increased FARs or anything like that?
No, it complies, as I mentioned, with all of the development standards for the two zones of this particular lot.
Okay, so if it was a strictly commercial property, then it would meet all those criteria as well?
Correct.
Okay, well, I feel better then.
That's a really good question. Anyone else for staff? All right, thank you very much. Now, if the applicant or representatives of the applicant would like to speak, you have up to 10 minutes.
Can you hear me okay? My name is Neil Miller. I work for 10 Over Studio. I've been the project manager on this project and lead designer for, I think we've been working on it for about a year. Rachel's been super helpful. We've gone through a lot with engineering. We're in a flood zone, in a flood plain. We've worked this site in many different ways. We've sited the building and buildings kind of all over, and we've landed on this specific space as kind of the only place we can do this. We're real excited to bring some new life down to that lower Higuera area, right? We're on the same property with Central Coast Brewing. There's already a distillery on property. So the future tenant that's moving in here is planning to relocate and will be and has already relocated their whole business to San Luis Obispo and will make San Luis Obispo their headquarters, and this is their flagship space. So, you know, speaking on behalf of the design team and everybody who's been involved and the applicant, you know, we're just really excited for this to be, you know, a feature for commercial tourism and commercial services, which are the primary zones on this site. And I think that's all I got, unless you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Actually, I just have a question, just looking at the resolution that staff is recommending we adopt. And there are a number of conditions included in this. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to speak to any of those if you have any concerns or reservations about any of those conditions.
To be honest, most of those conditions have already been addressed and are actually on the plans that we've submitted. Yeah, so most of them are annotated and already on those plans, so.
Okay, I read all of those. I wanted to make sure that you had to and didn't have any concerns about any of them.
No.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Go ahead.
So you're going to have a restaurant and a distillery and something like that?
That's the plan. Our firm is just doing the shell
Sure,
building.
sure, I understand that.
And so the future plan is to have the one operator. The back half will be in the commercial services zone, will be the warehouse and shipping. And then the front portion will be the whole distillery, the showcase, restaurant, tasting room on the second floor. So,
Wow.
excuse me, restaurant ground floor, bar, restaurant, viewing into the distillery, and then second floor will be an immersive tasting experience. So,
Cool.
yeah.
All right, thank you for that information. Appreciate it.
It really seems like a really exciting project, actually. When I was walking it today, this is just a question in the weeds. Sorry for that.
No
but,
pun intended.
The condition number 13 says there's 2 trees. I guess you were going to have 2 trees come down
Correct.
from the tree committee, but you're down to 1?
Did one of them come down already?
No, but you only show on your site plan, it only shows 1 tree being removed. And that's the big, and they're California peppers, not Brazilian peppers, but that's the big one right in the middle of your building.
Yeah, so it's not showing on this site plan, but it does show in the full set. On sheet, I don't know if you have access to the 8.5 by 11 that we
I
shared.
didn't, or I didn't take advantage of it.
Yeah,
I wish
so-
I had, because.
All the
even
sheets are
200%,
included in
these
the
are hard to read.
package. You can tell us what sheet number.
Yep. On sheet
this was
A1.0,
A1.0, that's what I'm talking about.
correct. So it's kind of hidden because it's right where the accessible path of travel comes across to that new parking. You can see it hatched, indicated with number 21 still. So there's, it's just really hidden in there.
I see. I couldn't read the numbers
It's-
even at
it's really-
200% zoom.
Yeah, it's a little bit to the left of where Rachel's cursor
In the
is
big
now.
triangle that's open there, is that what you're saying?
No, right,
Because there is a tree there now.
it's the
And
two pepper
obviously an
trees.
outdoor
Exactly.
relaxing place, and also maybe a meeting space. There's so many chairs there.
Central Coast Brewing is using it for various things, I think, from staff break room to special event space. But there are 2 pepper trees. Both of them, we are planning to bring down and plant 25 trees in its place. Yeah.
Okay, so they'll lose their outdoor gathering space.
We're going to, there's plenty of space along the creek, but that outdoor gathering space is, not even on their property. You can see the property line there.
I can see that.
Right now, it's just in between all the storage containers, but, we've worked with.
Squatters' rights.
Well, we've worked with George, and George is well aware of the project, and so we hope for some synergy.
Okay, so speaking of that, second question, there's a big white tower, I assume a tank, that's there now, and I can see it, and it's kind of fading, like it's
Correct.
going to disappear. I take it that's going to be moved, or?
No, that's just, I guess the lighter lines are to indicate the existing. And so we're trying to highlight what's being proposed, which is
I
everything
see,
in color.
and it
So
doesn't affect the backup space room for in front of the existing?
no, for Central Coast Brewing?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Well,
they have that ramp there.
Well, you have your existing building,
Correct.
from the distillery.
Correct. And so you can see their elevated loading dock just to the west of it, right? So they would pull in nose
No, I'm
in.
thinking of the existing building, not the new one.
There's 2 existing buildings on this plan. Which one are you, well, one of the existing buildings is being hidden by the text. The one that Rachel is on is that
That's
rectangle, right?
That's Central Coast Brewing. Then you. Oh,
So
that's
there's-
the landscape. I'm looking at the site plan, it's A10.
Mm-hmm.
the distillery is in a building now,
Distillery is on the northern part of the
Yeah,
property,
right.
correct?
and there's parking in front of it.
Yes.
The tank, just eyeballing it, looks like it could be in the way of cars backing up, parking in front of the existing building.
All of the parking in that tank are all existing, and so we're not proposing to change any of
Okay,
that.
I'll just let it go. Lastly, I can't resist asking, how do you remove a grave?
Remove a grave?
Yeah,
I'm not sure I follow.
there's a grave that's shown on the demolition plan, and it says there's a grave to be removed.
Is it a typo, huh?
I don't know. if it's a typo.
No
If it
graves
were
planning
me,
to
I
be
wouldn't want
removed.
it to be
What keynote?
I think it's in the demolition plan. You've got a lot of concrete, you got to remove a whole bunch of things. It's shown as kind of cobblestone or something.
Existing is it on C 2.0?
It says gravel. Gravel. I really got to see.
Well,
just
I can't
miss
read
the
it either.
days when we
8.5 by
actually used to
11
have
is-
plans that we could look at because I blew it up as big as I could. I still couldn't read it. Oh, that L, that's a big L. Damn. I was so excited. I thought there was going to be a mystery story. Okay, I said I was in the weeds. I'm done.
I'm glad we resolved the gravel versus grave issue.
Everybody else?
Commissioner Flores.
Just curious, on the north elevation, there's a gray rectangle. What and why?
The one on the second, kind of up towards the second
Yeah,
floor.
mhm.
So the mechanical pad is going to be inside, so all of the condensing units and the mechanical equipment will be in an unconditioned space, and so that's a whole wall of louvers. So it'll just allow for the fresh air to come in, so we can keep everything inside.
Okay, thank you.
So the property backs up to the creek. Was there any opportunity to do something positive the back there? I know that we've talked about trying to improve the flow, and there's been projects to kind of rehabilitate parts of that creek. Was there any discussion of that, or is there any way to think about having that be part of the, I mean, it's kind of in the back parking area, and it's sort of industrial back there, but it seems like possibly a missed opportunity to have creek access somehow.
Yeah.
You also got the freeway ramp though, right there.
Yeah, well, we're not allowed to do anything in the creek setback, right? So we have a top of bank setback, and then we also have, you probably saw the Bob Jones Trail has an easement through there, and so our plan, and we also have a lot of tricky grading back there because we can't increase the runoff and the volume of the water during the 50 and 100-year events. And so if you look at the civil plans, it actually dips down quite a bit into the back in order to keep all that water on the side that, could have been displaced by the large building. And so the plan is to have landscaping wherever we can, and to potentially put, some walkways, as you can see on the south of the property. We don't quite have the opportunity on the west, but the idea is to landscape heavily to have it feel very nice in there.
Okay, and then if Bob Jones Trail actually gets put through there, then maybe there's an off-ramp where people can come in and have a taste?
That would be ideal, right?
Yeah.
Right now, I think it's more about site security.
Okay, okay, yeah, thanks.
Did you want to ask the applicant about any of your bike locker questions?
No more questions.
No. Well, the bike locker thing is, I mean, we have them up at Cal Poly. There's the ones that sit out at the Madonna Plaza that I go by. I never see anybody using them. They're just kind of weird and plastic and junky. And I know that there's been people that try to live in them before, but so I just, I wonder how effective they are, but that's like something that's not really our problem tonight.
Yeah. Well, we do want to keep, we don't want them to be an eyesore. We want them to be used, and we want them to be seen, right? Whether it's short-term or long-term. And so, whether the tenant improvement plans include maybe some inside, I know that's on the table, but, we want to get the bike parking that we need. And there are plans for some commercial loading just south where the path of travel comes to across the street. or across the parking lot. So, we plan to keep them in view.
Are they intended for employees mostly or visitors?
It's both. It's both.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't state that they have to be for one or the other. It's just, we just have a requirement for long-term and short-term, so.
All right. I ride my bike everywhere, and I never have put my bike in a locker, and so I don't know why I would, I just want a rack.
Yeah.
And actually, well, I don't want to get too deep into this, but we've talked about bike racks in the past it was that project up at Monterey and Johnson, and the bikes are getting bigger. And now we've got cargo bikes, and we've got electric bikes, and we've got bikes with all the seat kit attachments and everything. So I would just urge generously sized and appropriately, and we got scooters and everything else. So, but whatever the Active Transportation Committee is asking for, that's what you've done, and so that's all we can ask you for. But the more the better, or, sufficient. Yeah.
Mr. Khan.
This is not a question, I'll just give you a comment, I've worked with the City of San Luis for quite a bit on drainage issues. They have massive projects through San Luis Creek, fixing and repairing the problems, increasing the flows, working on making it work better. So anyway, I just want to let you know that it's not a subject that's not being looked at.
That's good. I spent some time in Boulder, Colorado, and the creek runs right through town, and it's totally celebrated as a resource. Ours is almost completely ignored. I mean, right through downtown.
Good point.
We take advantage of it there. But then after that, it's really a liability, if anything, for flooding and for trespassing and for homeless and everything else. So it's, I really hope that we get that trail going all the way to the sea, and that it can be an asset rather than a liability. So that's why I was asking about that.
Bend, Oregon, the same way, they celebrate their river that goes through
the
town.
Deschutes through Bend.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really an asset for us that we should be doing more with.
Any further questions or comments for the applicant? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we're going to go to public comment. City Clerk, is there any public comment on this item?
No, there's not.
All right, I'll give the opportunity for anyone else who may wish to speak. Now is your chance. Not seeing anyone rushing to the front, we'll close public comment. At this point, the commission can have any other questions or comments for staff. I guess I would just ask, could you just highlight, there were a couple of areas that you asked us to consider specifically from other bodies. Can we just revisit those quickly?
Sure. The main one is the direction from the ARC regarding the north elevation. They did request that the applicant change some elements and add some architectural features to that north elevation. And so the Planning Commission, staff is fairly satisfied with what's proposed, but this is before you, and the ARC's recommendation is before you.
And I did see you had a diagram on one of your slides that showed the before and after, is that correct? Yeah. So I would just ask the commission if they have any comments on these changes or any other recommendations.
I was gonna say, I don't have any comments, but whenever it's appropriate, I'm happy to make a motion.
Just before we go to the motion, can we just look at the second item we were supposed to consider as well?
So the second item, and then there's also the tree committee item, both of them are integrated as conditions of approval, as they can be sort of amended or incorporated as part of the building plans. If the Planning Commission wanted to augment the language on that, they're welcome to do that as well as part of the motion.
Anyone interested in doing that or have any questions about that language? Well, with that, I did hear.
Yeah, I'd be happy to make a motion to approve with all of the additional conditions of approval. Thank you. So, to adopt the draft resolution with all the included conditions of approval as stated.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any other comments or deliberation before we call for our roll call? City Clerk, looks like we're ready for a roll call.
Commissioner Munoz Morris,
Yes.
Commissioner Houghton,
Yes.
Commissioner Flores,
Yes.
Commissioner Khan,
Yes.
Commissioner Tolley,
Yes.
Commissioner Jorgensen,
Yes.
Chair Cooley.
Yes. All right, with that, we're to item 5 in our agenda. Would our senior planner please provide an update?
Thank you, Chair Cooley. I'm going to stay here since I'm already here. So we have one item coming up at our next Planning Commission hearing. It's another appeal. This is a homestay application. And so that will be coming before you. And then the meeting after that, we currently do not have any items on the agenda.
So it looks like we will have a July 10th meeting. Is that correct? Okay.
What's the address?
1137
Thank you.
Peach.
Any other questions or comment for Rachel?
Can I just I just noticed something as we were going. It still shows me as Chair Munoz and you as Vice Chair, so I just wanted to know, just to give you your due, that you are now the Chair, so I don't know if that's something. we
I've
can-
already made a note of it.
Okay, great, I figured you had, yeah.
Thank you. My guess is that has something to do with the cards that are plugged into the speaker system. Okay.
Yeah, my card says I'm still Chair Khan also.
I think we have, we have several chairs.
I think we got these cards when I was chair, that's why it says chair, but yeah. I give them out. It's a power struggle.
All right, thank you very much. All right, we've reached the end of our agenda. The next regular meeting at the Planning Commission is scheduled for July 10th, 2024 at 6 p.m. in the council chambers at City Hall, 990 Palm Street, San Luis Obispo. Thank you very much, and we are adjourned.